Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin Lindegaard of Crops for Energy, and I'm your host for this Biomass Connect webinar on managing fuel storage and drying to best practice quality standards. Now, this is the last Biomass Connect webinar of the 2023 to 24 season. I know, time flies when you're enjoying yourself. As always, we've got a packed schedule today, and I'm going to start with a plug for the Biomass Connect website. Then I'll move on to a little bit of an intro to today's topic. Then I'll pass on to the three speakers for today. Yes, three, not two speakers as usual. And then there will be a Q&A option throughout. So please use the chat function to ask your burning questions. And right at the end, there will be a chance for me to tell you about some exciting things coming up in the next few months for Biomass Connect. So stay tuned for that. So if you were building a fire, of course, you would start small. Like always, you start with a match, with some kindling, maybe some newspaper. And that goes for the same sort of thing with a biomass boiler or a wood stove. Of course, what we've done is exactly the same sort of thing with the Biomass Connect website. It started as an ember, and then that ember became a flame. We've added more biomass to it in the form of news articles and case studies, the what's on guide, all these sort of things, and it's become a roaring success. I'm sure you'll agree. Now, if you want to fire your imagination, then all you need to do is to follow the beacon that is biomassconnect.org. Now, this is being recorded on YouTube, so if you're watching after the event, then please do subscribe to our channel, and if you like what you see, please give us a thumbs up. Thank you very much. So on to the main event. I'm delighted to be joined by three people that I know really quite well over the years. So this will be a bit like a campfire chat between friends. In the last few years, it's become a little bit more difficult to get a grant to put in a biomass boiler, but the renewable heat incentive that went from 2011 to 2021, and we'll have a legacy of 20 odd years. So we will be going until 2041. So the 15,000 or so people that have got biomass boilers will be using wood chip, wood pellets and logs for a long time to come. Now, of course, we all know that geopolitical events can make a difference to supply chains. There's one major supply route that's being disrupted at the moment. A couple of years ago, the Russian invasion of Ukraine caused a major disruption to the biomass supply, and that meant that there was escalation in prices, and of course it also fueled the cost of living crisis. So it's really important to, if you have a biomass boiler, to be aware of the alternatives, because those prices can go up. And I'm really pleased that two farmers are joining us today, David Christopher and Johnathan Andrew. They have been using miscanthus and willow in their biomass boilers for the best part of a decade. And they've been on the steep learning curve, and they'll be able to tell us all about the pros and cons of these different fuels. But first up, we're going to hear from Will Richardson, a renowned consultant who's been in this field for now on 30 years. He represents his company called RDI Associates. So Will and I have been around since we were fresh-faced graduates, and been in the biomass game ever since. And Will was responsible for creating the Ignite course, which is an award-winning Landry course, and he's also created the Woodfuel quality assurance course as well. And we've been working together on many consultancy projects down the years, and he'll be able to give you all of this information. Now, in recent years, he's been working for as a contractor for the biomass suppliers list and Woodshore, and chances are, if you have a biomass boiler, then Will or one of his colleagues will be landing on your doorstep at some point to make sure that you're doing everything right, handling and using your fuel in the right way, and keeping your records up to scratch. So if you have a biomass boiler, then this is an absolutely essential viewing. I've given Will the virtually impossible task of trying to cram several hundred pages of rules, regulations and guidance into a 15-minute talk. He's got the credentials to do it, I'm sure. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Will. Please fire away.
Thanks very much, Kevin. That's very kind of you for those kind words of introduction. Yeah, I've been doing it quite a while now, and over the last few years had a bit of experience on biomass suppliers list, Woodfuel, etc. So yeah, the next sort of 10-15 minutes will focus on quality standards. We'll cover a range of topics. It'll be fairly high level. Obviously very happy to answer questions afterwards. Just a very brief introduction to what the solid biofuel standards are, what they tell us, and what that means in terms of suppliers signing up to those through Woodfuel, and where the link to the biomass suppliers list is. Just a few pointers about requirements if you're registered as a self-supplier or a producer trader. I'll just talk about that in a little bit more detail. What it means to actually, keep your records, keep your documentation, to maintain a quality control system and manual, i.e. signed up to Woodfuel, what we would like to see you do, and then a little bit about record keeping, so moisture content analysis, different options around that, sampling and testing, and then we'll just raise a few specific points on quality issues on biomass crops, and a quick bit about just health and safety, particularly fuel storage. So what is Woodfuel quality assurance? What is quality assurance in general, really? I'm sure some people on this call listening in have experience of things like ISO accreditation. Essentially, that's what we're talking about. We start with a specification. So what is that specification? i.e. if it's Woodfuel, what are the physical properties? So usually, as Woodfuel suppliers or users, they will be determined by your boiler manufacturer. They'll say, this boiler is capable of taking this type of Woodfuel at this moisture content range at this particle size. That's your specification. And they can be set by other people, not just the boiler manufacturer, but generally speaking, that's what we aim for. We can then look at standards that would then say, okay, we can now develop a standard that these specifications can be measured against. So the standard that we're interested in solid woody biomass as the ISO 17225, solid biofuels. I'll just talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then in order to sign up to that standard, you're talking about quality assurance and quality assurance scheme, and of course Woodfuel being the quality assurance scheme. But that's not the only trick in town, so to speak. You can develop your own quality assurance processes, your own documentation, and indeed you could theoretically put that through other ISO accreditations such as 9001. So what is the solid biofuel standard that we are talking about? This is now called the ISO 17225, and essentially it's a set of very dry documents. I'm afraid don't have the time to go into it in any detail, but it sets things like specification and classes of Woodfuel, how to sample Woodfuel, how to test Woodfuel, and so on. Just useful to give a few quick definitions here. Exactly what is solid biofuel? It's there in the green box. What is biomass, and therefore what is woody biomass? Essentially, we're talking about biomass from trees, bushes and shrubs. That will include short rotation coppice. So we now come on to some definitions, including the biomass suppliers list, and what's useful to understand, I think, is virgin wood. So we'll park waste. We're not covering that. That's entirely dealt with in an entirely different way. But virgin wood is essentially trees, bushes, shrubs, roundwood, short rotation coppice. Sawmill residues are arbor risings, utility, service, transport link management, that kind of thing. And then under the BSL, it asks you to define your legality and sustainability status of those raw materials. And we can define it in 3 ways: category A, B, and C. A is where you go for a full, again, quality assurance scheme, such as FSC, PFC. So here in the UK, that would be to our UK Woodland Assurance Standard. Category B is if you've got very detailed record keeping that would include things like management, woodland plans, woodland management plans. And then what I recommend all suppliers that I talk to is have something called a risk-based regional assessment, and this can include woody biomass crops such as short rotation coppers. I would have one of those regardless. It's something that maybe Kevin and the team at Biomass Connect can send out a template version of that risk-based regional assessment if that's helpful. But I certainly recommend, as somebody who goes around and seeing a lot of suppliers and uses a biomass, that's a useful document to have. It declares effectively legality and sustainability status of your raw materials. Of course, we're talking about non-woody biomass, and we're going to see a case study on that a little bit later. Then that goes through the Sustainable Fuels Register, and the other guys on the call are more knowledgeable about than that than I am. So just to reiterate, the biomass suppliers list is about the fuels, your fuel, and the raw materials that go into making your fuel. It's not a quality assurance scheme. There's often a bit of confusion around that. Probably could have been made clearer at the start of things, but it is about the fuels, and we register wood chip or hog fuel. The difference being chip is made from sharp cutting instruments and hog is made from blunt cutting or smashing instruments like hammer mills, etc. Essentially treated the same way. That's firewood, pellets, and briquettes. They're the 4 categories that you can sign up to under the BSL. Pellets are dealt with separately. They're dealt with under the N+ scheme. And obviously we all know, or we should all know on this call, that boilers receiving renewable heat incentive payments must source fuel from legal and sustainable sources in line with UK government regulations, and essentially buy from people signed up to the biomass suppliers list. Recently, 2021, came into effect that basically government now wanted to link biomass suppliers list registered fuels to a quality assurance scheme. Because the BSL was never set up as a quality assurance scheme, it was about sustainability and legality of raw materials and a list of fuels. It's now a question that if you supply virgin woody biomass, you have to sign up to a quality assurance scheme. Obviously, most people have gone down the Woodshaw route. And as I stated before, it's not applicable to waste wood sources. So the categories under the BSL, self-suppliers, I imagine quite a few who have boilers and are growing energy crops would be signed up as a self-supplier if they solely use that biomass themselves. You have to source it within a certain radius, in this instance it's 50 miles, and you can buy in top-up fuel registered from another producer trader. So if you start to sell on any of the fuel that you produce to people with boilers with RHI, then you become a producer trader and you should sign up as a producer trader. So you may purchase some raw material in to process into your finished fuel product, and you can use some of your own raw materials as well, or purely use your own raw materials and sell fuel on to a third party. But you can also purchase fuel from an authorised supplier. So Woodshaw, so that's the Woodshaw logo. I've just put the ready to burn next to it. That's for firewood supplies, not relevant to wood chip and energy crop based fuels, but just thought I'd just make try and differentiate it because there's a bit of confusion out there. So Woodshaw is effectively a full quality assurance scheme, UCAS based quality assurance scheme, and yeah, there's a bit to do to make sure you're compliant with it. Key requirements and some things I often see if I'm visiting people. It's important that you set out in a quality manual your processes, how you get to that end fuel product. What do you do? What is document your processes. You may have a very well established system and you yourself are very knowledgeable at this, but me as somebody who's coming along, doesn't know the first thing about what you do or how experienced you are, the first question I'll ask, have you documented this? Do you have something to show me? Quality manual, a process flow chart, a site plan, fuel specifications. These are the kinds of things we want to see as part of that quality assurance scheme. And then finally, your fuel quality declaration, which says, this is our product, it's wood chip, it's this moisture content, it's this particle size. And that would ensure you would be effectively compliant with Woodfuel. Often your BSL invoices that you produce, if you're a producer trader, is essentially your fuel quality declaration if you put on your Woodfuel accreditation as well. But again, I've limited time to discuss the detail of that. Just useful, again, something I ask a lot of is how people sample and test their product. We do encourage you to understand the moisture content of your product as much as possible, and that means regular sampling and testing. Okay, not a great deal of time to run through this procedure in detail, but we'll make these slides available for you to follow. It's a fairly simple process. It's essentially trying to be as random as possible when you're taking the sample. And the more random you are, the more samples you take, the better the average you'll get from in terms of moisture content if you're doing your own particle size testing as well. Just a bit of jargon, what we mean about things like nominal top size, etc., etc., and the different size classes that we talk about with ISO solid biofuel standards discussed in P, whereas a lot of people, I'm sure on this call, will be used to the O norm, which is the Austrian standard, and the G particle specification. They are not apples and apples, they are two different things. Next slide, hopefully this is, well, that's a sampling tool. If you're doing sampling properly, you want an appropriately sized tool. I actually just use a large grain shovel. It has an aperture big enough to accept large slithers and hold at least 2.5 to 3 litres of chip on each scoop. So nice simple way of looking at it. But if you want to do it accurately, then you'd follow that formula to get the right sampling tool. Hopefully the next slide that we'll see now is going to show us, yeah, so that's sampling from a stockpile. So an increment is a scoop. So you assess the size of your pile of chip you want to sample, and you use that formula, and it will tell you how many scoops of chip you need to take. So let's say if I go along and sample 500 cubic meter pile, it's roughly, if it's fairly dry, it's going to be about 100 tons. I'm going to be taking about 12 to 14 scoops out of that. I'll mix those together and then take away about 5 kilos to be sampled for moisture content and particle size. Hopefully you can interpret what's on the slides in more detail later on. And like I say, for moisture content testing, around about 5 kilos, 3 to 5 kilos, the more the better. That's the formula to use if you're drying out in an oven. Wet weight minus the dry weight divided by the wet weight times 100 will give you your moisture content fairly accurately. You can do it in the oven at home. Makes your kitchen smell of damp wood. So if you don't mind that, it is possible to do it. Should discuss other moisture content measuring devices. I'm sure, again, a lot of you will be familiar with probes, buckets, pin meters. They all work. They all give you a good analysis of where you are with your moisture content there and then. The more you use them, the more data you get, the better your average will become, basically. A couple of pointers. A lot of these devices don't like to be used in very cold conditions or likewise very hot conditions. Read the manufacturer's advice note in there and see what the temperature tolerances are. You may have to adjust your reading accordingly if you're a certain number of degrees above, let's say, room temperature. It will tell you in the handbook how to do that. So that's one to be aware of, particularly if you're measuring moisture content this time of year when it's damp and cold. You may just have to do a manual adjustment to that. This is the one I was referring to between O norm and the new ISO standard, the P's and the G's. Basically, the difference is the old O norm, your particle, your wood chip sample had to pass through a mesh, a welded mesh. That's the top sieve. And of course, now under the P, it has to pass through the round punched holes, which actually, if you think about it, is pretty different. And it actually creates a slightly different product at the end of it. So you can't compare, let's say, a G30 directly to a P16 but there are similarities and there are tolerances within that. What we like to see in Woodfuel now is that you specify the ISO standard, the P standard. You can then put in brackets the G equivalent if you want to, but we do want to see that you specify under the ISO. Yeah, so record keeping, just some pointers. Very keen to see that you're doing regular testing, keeping records. Very keen to see you keeping good records on your incoming raw material. If you're buying in raw materials, whether that's roundwood, chip, etc., who you bought it from, where it's come from, how far it's come. Does it have any quality assurance accreditation to that fuel? All good stuff. Keep that paperwork, keep that information, and then sales. When you're selling on as a producer trader, there's certain things we look at, including things like delivery addresses, date sold, date delivered, the amount, that can be weight, volume, or heat. Making sure you put your BSL number on and your moisture content. Again, if you're Woodfuel, you just put down your Woodfuel specification. So, for example, if you're selling wood chip at a P31 particle size and an M30, that would mean less than 30%. So that is perfectly acceptable. Don't overcomplicating it by putting, let's say, 22.89% moisture content. It's not necessary. So I'm hoping Kevin can help me with these next bullet points on specific points for biomass crops. So I've really rattled through BSL and Woodfuel there. But look, this isn't just unique to short rotation coppice, energy crops, these points. This can happen to different species of timber as well. So in particular, willow and willow SRC has a high bark content because you are harvesting it in small diameter, therefore the bark to stemwood ratio is higher. So it tends to have higher ash remains. That could be up to 3%. Just one to bear in mind. And this one here, Miscanthus, has an even higher ash content than willow. I think that's typical for grasses, isn't it, Kevin? Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Those of you who know more about Miscanthus, it's the silica content, I believe, and of course it's a non-combustible silica essentially. Dust and particulates can be an issue, and may necessitate additional abatement equipment. We might learn a bit more about the case study on that a bit later. Is that right? Don't know if that comes into...
Not quite, no.
Okay. Okay, one Kevin asked me, does an emission certificate cover just wood chip, also cover willow wood chip? Yes, applies to woody biomass, basically. It's a question we do ask, have you got an emission certificate to burn that type of fuel? And of course, got a boiler, they'll all come with an emission certificate and they'll tell you what you can burn. And where we get slightly confused is if people are putting in what they would term to be A-grade waste wood, i.e. shredded pallets. That is not virgin wood. And therefore you'd need a different type of boiler and emission certificate to cover that. Willow tends to be higher nitrogen than most roundwood chips. Again, I just think it's the nature of the crop, and when you harvest it, it's young, so it's going to have a higher nitrogen content because you're harvesting it young. And obviously you will have more green material in your harvested willow crop, and therefore higher chlorine and sulfur content. And this can cause issues with combustion chambers, but I believe any boiler experts will tell you that that can be abated by regular maintenance, cleaning ash out, and making sure you've got your boiler temperature set correctly for that type of fuel. Again, this issue of silica here with Miscanthus as well. And then obviously your point of harvest and moisture content can be high with willow and other energy crops, okay, because you're harvesting young, it's vigorous, it's growing vigorously, this stuff. So it can have a higher moisture content at point of harvest. This one I'm not so sure about, Kevin, about people using Miscanthus. This issue about emission certificates, you'll have to help me out with that one.
Yeah, so that is a case of after 2013, anyone using a boiler and wanting to use Miscanthus would have to get a special emission certificate, and unfortunately most biomass boilers have got emission certificates for wood chip, They don't routinely have them for miscanthus, and it's much more difficult to get them because you've got to get the boiler installer, or sorry, the boiler manufacturer to actually test them. It's an expensive process. So generally, users have to get an in situ test done, which means that all of the risk and all of the expense goes with the person who has to do it. So it's something that can be done, but it has to be entered into with determination and expectations that can be met, hopefully, in time.
And I think the next 2 points you could probably cover for me too. Kevin, again, this is an area not that I'm not strong on, sustainable fuels register and other grassy biomass types.
Yeah, so the sustainable fuel register covers non-wood fuels generally, so miscanthus, straw, reed canary grass, these sort of things. The good thing about it is that covers the sustainability aspects, but there are no quality aspects to it because there aren't sufficient people doing it. So some of the things that Will has mentioned about Woodshaw, that just covers woody crops and woody species. So you don't have to worry about the quality side of things.
That's correct, yeah. Just a quick one, really. I think the main thing about biomass storage is ventilation. And I'm sure most people do, and whenever I go and visit sites, most biomass is stored in nice big airy open barns. It's just airflow, getting the dust down. You can, and this is unusual, fresh chipped, fresh pressed pellets as well actually will release carbon monoxide. So it's just ventilation. And I'm sure everyone on the call knows about movement of machinery, etc. But definitely ventilate stores and hoppers as best you can. And this is when we were developing our Woodfuel quality standards training courses, and we had a session of various folk from across not just the UK but further afield, descended on a poor Woodfuel producer up in North Yorkshire. And we all came with shovels and buckets and pin meters and all sorts, and that's just a way of sampling with that shovel that I mentioned earlier. So there's your grain shovel, making a pile, and then mixing it and dividing it until you've got a suitably big sample of 5 kilos of chip to test. Right. And that's a bucket meter there, which is essentially it's good, reasonable device for measuring moisture content. Yeah, sorry about that. That's what
we've got one quick question before we move on. In the chat, does a wood chip buyer pay for kilowatt hours or tons? In your experience, what is there a percentage split between those two?
Good question. I mostly see suppliers that charge by weight, because most biomass, most of the producer traders I see, it all goes over a weighbridge. So they charge by weight, so per ton. Occasionally I see guys that will charge on a cubic meter if they've got a trailer, a delivery trailer that let's say it's 10 or 30 cube. Rarely do I see folk with charging on pence per kilowatt hour, but it certainly can be done. The big catch on that one is making sure that you, the supplier, are not penalised for the inefficiencies of the system of your customer. So you definitely want to charge for delivered energy, not used energy. Hopefully that makes sense.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Will. We'll come back to you with plenty more questions.
I'll stay on the call. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lovely degree of connectivity between the last webinar and this one. So in the last one, you would have seen me talking about with Ed Druitt, the ornithologist, about bird surveys that were carried out in 2 farms down in the southwest. I'm delighted to say that the 2 farmers in question are joining us today. And what that goes to show is that these plantations provide exceptional ecosystem services whilst they are growing, but they also provide a very important crop that can be part of a farm business venture. So I've known Johnathan, Andrew and David Christopher over a decade now, and I came to know them because there was an incredibly good scheme around in the early 2010s called the Resource Efficiency for Farms scheme, the R4F. It was run by Rural Focus, which was a quango of Business Link in the southwest, and it linked up consultants with farmers. And it had two parts of it. So the first part was an action plan that was completely paid for by Business Link. And I would go to see the farmer and look at their water, waste and energy use, and then make some recommendations on what they could do on their farm in order to improve things. Now, the second bit, which was also very, very good, and it drew the farmer in with a bit of a payment on this occasion. So the consultant was then paid 70% by Rural Focus and 30% by the farmer in order to do up to 2 days of technical advice. And that usually took the form of a feasibility study. And in both cases, for Johnathan and David, I did a biomass boiler feasibility study, but based on their uses with miscanthus and willow. And I'm really glad to say that over a decade later, both systems are working very, very well. And I think it just goes to show that that sort of scheme where you're putting knowledge at the disposal of farmers means that it is possible to achieve very, very good quality schemes. So I'd love to see something like that come back again as we go forward and try to meet our net zero targets. So we're going to start with Johnathan Andrew from Umberleigh Barton Farm. So Johnathan is right at the very end of the wood fuel supply chain. So his biomass story is very much based on him not wanting to be a price taker. And I'm going to pass straight over to Johnathan, who will tell us how he keeps his radiators nice and toasty for himself and his tenants. So thank you, Johnathan. Pass straight over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that introduction. So our farm, Umberleigh Barton, is located in the Tor Valley in North Devon. Covers just about 400 acres in total, with a mixture of operations, mostly arable, but we farm conventionally and organically in part as well. Mostly grade 2 and 3 land located in the bottom of the valley, which is largely flat, only 23 meters above sea level, with a moderate amount of annual rainfall, although at the moment it feels like it's gone on forever, and I'm desperately hoping for a dry period soon. Our soil type is largely clay, which can be heavy in places, and in the winter months we do get periods of prolonged waterlogging and flood events with the proximity of the River Tor. So in 2015 we took the decision to move forward with some planting of willow, approximately 3.95 hectares, which was established through support from the energy crop scheme that existed then. We planted using a step planter, which was not available locally, but we were able to bring one down from further afield, working jointly with another farmer in Somerset at the time. And I consider that to be an essential part of the successful establishment that we've seen. We harvest around about between 0.3 and 0.7 hectares a year is our target, but that does vary dependent on weather. This current autumn winter we're behind on that, unfortunately, but hopefully, as I say, we will have a dry spell at some point and make up some ground there. Our aim is to harvest enough material to produce circa 100 meters cubed of chip, which would do roughly about a third of our annual requirement. Our biomass system is based around a ETA 130 boiler installed in 2013 and RHI accredited. We undertook extensive research at the time and settled on ETA for their reliability, maintenance performance, and the fact that they were a well-established manufacturer at the time. The properties that it serves include the farmhouse and 4 residential properties rented out to long-term tenants, and they are all connected via approximately 200 metres of a district heating network around the farmyard. The tenanted properties are all invoiced quarterly at a relatively low price, but we've kept the price low since we started this, as we feel it enables the tenants to heat their properties comfortably, and that in consequence has benefits for us as landlords with improved sort of maintenance situation, with less damp, condensation and mold issues, for example, with the tenants being comfortable and the properties being well looked after. The majority of the properties would be an EPC C to E rating. So yes, and being a traditional construction, as I say, they really do benefit from adequate heating, and where tenants aren't constantly watching the bills there. We have installed an oil backup boiler, and also since the initial installation, we've added a backup distribution pump, because that our main distribution pump went wrong at one point, broke down, and there wasn't a replacement available in the country, and it was a 48-hour courier from Germany, and typically that was in the middle of winter when we really needed the system most. Our annual requirement for chip is around 60 tonnes per annum. So our process, we harvest in January, February. The majority of this is done via manual chainsaw work, although we have last winter explored the use, as the image shows here, of a tree shear mounted on a 360 excavator. That has some significant benefits on some of our wetter parcels in particular, where it minimises disruption and damage to the ground conditions. From there, we move the cut rods to a hardcore pad using a telehandler mounted with a grab on the front. From there, we chip the willow later in the year, usually around the end of August or beginning of September, after, like I say, from the hardcore pad, but that is subject to the weather. Again, this autumn just gone, the summer and autumn weather wasn't conducive to chipping outside, so we have in that instance, for the first time, moved the cut rods to a barn, where they have been chipped from that situation direct to a trailer, which has enabled us to still produce good usable wood chip despite the weather, the adverse weather conditions. The chipper is a PTO driven machine. It's a TP230 with slither breakers fixed, and which is run off a 100 horsepower tractor. So the chip is then taken to a barn where we have the fuel bunker, and tipped in front of the bunker itself, where we have capacity for around about 40 to 50 meters cubed. The fuel is then, the chip is then pushed into the bunker using a telehandler with front mounted bucket. And then during winter, that will be a weekly or 2 weekly event, depending on the weather and the fuel requirements of the boiler. So the de-ashing is very straightforward, and we found that the willow doesn't produce significant quantities of ash, about 3/4 of a barrelful after the boiler, consuming between 1,800 and 2,200 kilograms of wood chip. And that ash is then added to the farmyard manure and spread at a suitable time during the year. It's a very straightforward process, done, it takes about 5 minutes. So our sort of economics, you know, we really do consider the essential establishment being done through mechanized use of a step planter. That was all done very, very easily. Weather conditions obviously help massively at a point of establishment. The manual harvesting is labour intensive, but in the large part that suits our operation. As I say, the use of the excavator with the tree shear will become more of a feature on one of our parcels in particular, which is particularly prone to waterlogging. Our on-farm production, you know, really has the aim of producing about 40 to 50% of our fuel requirement with a view that that mitigates our reliance on third-party price increases, which are now charging us in the region of 43 pounds a metre cubed of chip. So yes, key lessons here from our point of view are that we really do need that space to handle the cut material. We're lucky enough that around our 3 parcels of willow, we've got a 700 square metre, sorry, hardcore pad externally where we can immediately drop the cut willow, and from there, as I say, we can either chip in the autumn if the weather's right, or we now have access to a barn, which is really quite useful when we've had an autumn winter like we just have. And that 3,500 square feet that we can occupy and chip in undercover has enabled us to keep going with that this winter. We also have invested, well, they were already in existence, so we've invested further in tracks around the willow plantations that we've got, and at the point of harvest, when in January, February, when it's invariably wet ground conditions and we're doing multiple runs over the same sort of areas, the tracks really do help get that harvested material out as cleanly as possible. As I say, repairs and maintenance, the ETA boiler has been very reliable from our point of view. The distribution pump's gone down, but we've written that was an unfortunate replacement quite early on. But the repairs to this equipment, the parts do take some time to get here from time to time, and they can be expensive. Most recently, we've had to replace the screen on the boiler, around about £1,500 worth of cost. So not without its costs, but it has been a very useful and improves the heating system on the farm, throughout the farmhouse and cottages, over the oil boilers that previously existed. And it's something that we've been very pleased with, and hopefully over the course of its life, the willow plantation will continue to provide good, clean fuel sustainably for our boiler. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnathan. That's an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. I was just going to say, you had 4.28 pence per kilowatt hour as your willow cost. What is the equivalent for the 42 pounds per cubic metre? Do you know that, or if you don't, I might have to work it out whilst David is there talking.
I only had notification of the increase yesterday, so I haven't quite worked that out yet, Kevin, but we'll do the maths whilst David's talking.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so moving on to David Christopher. So David's story is slightly different because, unlike Johnathan, he already had a crop of miscanthus when he decided to go down this route. So he was one of the first people to get in on the RHI Act back in about 2011-12, and he was determined to use the miscanthus crop that he had. So without further ado, David, please tell us all about it and the steep learning curve that you've had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, so I will start by just giving you a little background information about the farm. So we're located on the southern edge of Exmoor, a mixed stock farm, high rainfall area, 1400 mil average. The elevation is around about 180 meters above sea level. Soil type is shallow, brashy loam. It's not great soil. Because of the high rainfall, we don't usually suffer from drought, but in a dry year, we can dry out in places. Definitely steep in places. You'll notice from the map there that the miscanthus fields are very close to the farm itself, and that's a great advantage. We don't want to be carrying large quantities of bulky, loose material long distances, and our situation is ideal for that. We planted the crop in 2007 with a view to taking advantage of the RHI, and also when it came in, let's talk about it then, but also as a livestock bedding. So we planted 15 hectares, and we use approximately half of it for heating. We have an average yield of about 7.5 tons dry matter per hectare per year, and it's harvested in April. Now, when we were looking to choose which crop to grow, we went for Miscanthus over short rotation coppers, primarily because there was a good market, an easy market for any surplus crop. So the biomass heating system is very similar to what Johnathan has described. Same machine, ETA 130, installed in 2012, and that supplies 2 domestic houses and 3 poultry sheds. We require around about 50 tons of chip per year, and we have a log boiler as a backup. So the harvesting done by contractors, forage harvester, self-propelled forage harvester used, producing chip, which is blown into trailers and carted back to the barn, where it's stored anything up to 5 meters deep. The forage harvester is set up very similar to what would be used for a maize harvest. Right. Well, the handling both into and out of the store is done with a 3 cubic meter loader bucket on a telehandler. You'll notice that there's a grapple on the bucket. That is essential. So we're dealing with a very light, low density product, and a real mess is made if it's a windy day and you don't have some means of compressing it. So that grapple has turned out to be indispensable. We harvest the crop at a high moisture content, higher than many. We've been forced into this for 2 reasons. One is that we're in a high rainfall area. We tend to find a problem getting prolonged dry spells to get the crop down to 15% moisture content, which is what's required for long-term storage. The other problem, a very practical one, is reliant on contractors means that we often tend to be near the bottom of the list. We're a long way from the contractor and we have relatively small acreages to harvest. So we have to take advantage of the availability of the contractor when he is ready to do our crop. So as soon as the ground conditions are good enough, we will be in there. We can dry the crop from as high as 38% moisture down to 15 using the pedestal fans, and we have found they work very well. The cost to this in terms of energy is, the average is about 20 kilowatt hours per ton. One point there, you have the option with these pedestal fans of either sucking air through the crop or blowing it. We've found that the procedure works much better by sucking air through rather than attempting to blow it. So filling the bunker, it's very straightforward, using the same telehandler bucket, and it works out on average about once a week we have to fill it. Takes 30 minutes approximately. De-ashing, very similar to what Johnathan described, but as has been mentioned already, the Miscanthus does produce more ash. So our fuel bunker is approximately 30 cubic meters, and that would produce a barrel full of ash. As with Johnathan, the ash is mixed with manure and spread back on the fields, in our case, back on the Miscanthus fields. So the costings, very interesting to note the difference between my costings and Johnathan's. There's one major difference between the two, and that is the amount I'm paying for boiler running and repair costs. Same boiler, putting through similar sorts of tonnages of crop, but the Miscanthus burns a lot hotter, and as a result, we've been landed with considerably bigger repair costs. Over the last couple of years, that's run at an average of £7,000 a year. So that accounts for the big difference in total costs between ourselves and Johnathan. It still pays to do without the RHI, but when this RHI comes to an end, we'd have to look very carefully at the economics, and the boiler repair costs are the big question mark there. So what have we learned? Consistent chop length is very important for a trouble-free auger feed. This can only be achieved by direct harvesting in our experience. We have tried swathing the crop and letting it dry in the row and then collecting it with a forage harvester, but that produces a very irregular chop length and causes all sorts of problems with boiler feeding. So the augers tend to choke up and we get a lot of blockages. The next point I would say is we have, in our experience anyway, we have to forget trying to chip the crop at or below 15%. We just get it when the weather allows. We've had experience in a couple of years where we've waited and waited, and those dry spells never come. So that's an important lesson. And finally, the boiler repair costs, which I've already dealt with, could easily be underestimated. And I think the fact that we're burning miscanthus is the cause of these high costs. So I just finished by saying that I'm just recounting what we've done, what we've found to work well. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it or the only way to do it, but this is our experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That's brilliant stuff. So we'll just have some questions. I think we'll run over about 5 or so minutes just to make sure that we can get questions to the specialists. First and foremost, I'm just going to ask Will, how many people that you've audited down the years have been SRC users or non-typical woody biomass users? I'm not talking about waste here, but things like eucalyptus or other poplar, perhaps. Any idea?
Oh goodness, Kevin, I would say the vast majority are just standard roundwood users. They just buy timber in and the wagon load and chip it and dry it and sell it on. That's your standard. So it's probably only 5, maybe 10% of people I see use woody energy crop. And that's usually willow. You know, it's willow SRC that I see, you know, more regularly than other alternative sources.
So you use 5 or 10%. That's still quite a lot.
Yeah, that sorry, Kevin, that includes other sources of woody biomass.
With miscanthus, through the sustainable fuel register, which I run, there's about 10 users that use miscanthus. So I was just saying to Johnathan and David, based on that, are you surprised there's more people that are following your footsteps, really? So I'll ask Johnathan first.
Sorry, Kevin, I didn't catch your question. Then you broke up.
Yes, sorry. It's are you surprised that more people aren't following your footsteps, really? And because you have shown that it's actually quite affordable to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could grow in popularity. I think generally, though, in our part of the world, we're lacking the machinery base to help with the establishment and also with the harvest. I don't think many people would be keen to do what we're doing, perhaps with the manual harvesting, and you know the like. And like I say, as you know, the step planter isn't something which is readily available in the southwest, and I just don't think it's been that well sort of become well known down here in our part of the world. But as the price of fuel increases, you know, as I've just learnt now, you know, we've did some basic maths, and I think we're going to be up over 5 pence if we're buying in now per kilowatt hour on the chip. So if that price continues to increase, people may start to look at this further. And of course, if there is any form of government support through something like the sustainable farming incentive, for example, that might evolve over the course of time, then that may also help new entrants looking at this as an opportunity.
And David, any thoughts on why more people aren't using miscanthus?
Yes, I think it has a place, but it's a very small niche. This basically comes down to the fact that you need a fairly high heat requirement to make it viable, and also it is a very costly fuel to transport because the chip product is so low in density. So if you have the situation like we do in our position, where high heat demand and the crop is grown very close to the point of use, it works very well. And financially, it's been a very good move from our point of view. But in other circumstances, I don't see it would work so well. And for the boiler to operate with material produced from bale miscanthus doesn't operate, it doesn't work very well in our experience, because the product is usually too light and fluffy if it's put through a hammer mill, and you can't get enough fuel into the boiler quickly enough to produce the required heat output. So in summary, I'd say, yeah, a very specific niche, it's great, but for general use, I'm not so sure.
Sure, and just as a reminder, of course, anyone after 2013 who had a RHI accreditation date after that, you would need to get an emissions certificate specifically for miscanthus, which is a big barrier. Once you've got that, you also would need to do a RHI amendment as well. Will, you what is the most common failings when you do an audit? And after you've answered that, I'm going to ask Johnathan and David whether they have been audited and how the experience was for them, if indeed they have been. So,
it's traumatic, Kevin. I'm sure the guys will say it's something that nobody wants to go through. No, look, it's a boring answer, I'm afraid, Kevin. It's numbers that people no longer. If it's a biomass audit, it's redundant BSL numbers that you no longer use. Just if you don't use them, get rid of them. Because I come along and say, look, if you don't use it, you're not reporting against it, then I have to raise it as a major corrective action, and it has to be dealt with straight away. And that's just an administrative pain in the proverbial. So if you have redundant BSL numbers you're not using, get rid of them. Write to the BSL administrator and say, I don't use this number, I want to close it down. So that's the boring one on the BSL. And the other ones, it's minor issues, not keeping records up to date. I like to see a risk-based regional assessment, so I will push home that point to suppliers. It is a good document to use, but make sure you read it and understand what it's telling you. It's documentation, Kevin. It is always down to documentation.
Sure.
You can go around a yard and it's perfectly well run, bags of experience, expertise, doing everything right, the fuel is good, but just keep your paperwork up to date. That's really what it comes down to most of the time.
Absolutely. So typically, if you're taking the King's Shilling, make sure you keep your documents up to scratch. So I'm hoping that Johnathan and David have their documentation up to scratch. So this time, David, you first. Have you been audited, and how was the experience in your situation?
A nice short answer: no, we haven't.
Okay, and Johnathan.
Just as short, it's a no from me as well, I'm afraid.
Oh,
we haven't been audited yet. No.
Well, in some respects, that's probably because you're seen as low risk, and it might well be because you fill out your quarterly returns on time every quarter. So that's good news.
We wouldn't go and see David because he's non-woody biomass, but we possibly might go and see Johnathan. But he is, I'm guessing, a self-supplier, Johnathan.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you're low risk. It's highly unlikely anyone will come out and see you. You might be selected for what they call an e-audit, where you just fill out a questionnaire and send in the documentation to show that you are keeping the records they're asking you to keep. It's a fairly straightforward process.
Okay, I've got a quick question on drying. So early on in the RHI, you were able to use the RHI to do drying. If someone wanted to use one of these crops with a biomass boiler that has been installed under the RHI, and they decide retrospectively now to put in a drying floor, how does that work? Presumably, I'm surmising that you can get RHI for it, but you can use the boiler to dry the fuel.
Pass, Kevin. I don't know enough about the RHI to answer that one.
All right, okay.
I'm just not knowledgeable about the RHI. Biomass suppliers list, Woodfuel, no problem, but RHI, I couldn't tell you what's eligible and what's not eligible. Not with any degree of confidence. So I couldn't tell you.
Well, what we will do for anyone who's interested in that answer is we will come up with the right answer and stick it on the end of the of this webinar when it is published online. Great. Okay, I think that's brilliant, guys. Really enjoyed the campfire chat. It's been really helpful. So, question for Johnathan: has he planted anything under his willow crop? Has he seen much wildlife?
Well, we haven't directly planted anything under there, but the natural regeneration of the ground, which was previously sort of low value grassland, like I say, quite waterlogged in places with rushes in part, the natural regeneration, and we found that, as Kevin has been sort of with us on a survey with recently, there is significant bird life there. We found deer do like to sort of occupy part of it. They haven't really caused us any damage in the willow, the deer, any significant damage, but we find that the hinds do like to come in there and have their young. It's a relatively safe place. They seem to like to do that. Like I say, a lot of bird life, likes of pheasants and partridge, occasionally come in there as well and find it good cover. But yes, it's certainly been a useful, a valuable addition to the farm's, biodiversity and habitat. Yes.
And Neil also says, can you claim SFI for this natural regen?
The only element of it that I don't think we can. Like, the only element I've been able to sort of apply via our RPA system is no application of pesticides or that option. The grassland margins may also qualify, but to be honest with you, I'm still struggling with the mapping on our for our SFI application, so I haven't got through all of that yet. But like I said earlier, I'm hoping that there may be some further additions to SFI over the course of time, which may not only benefit myself, but they may well incentivize others to sort of look at short rotation coppice, as the price of wood chip increases.
Great, thank you. And Melissa Rowell has answered my question for us, actually. She said the boiler could only be used to dry the fuel if it was originally accredited for drying fuel, and then adds, if you want to claim RHI for the drying process, you could record the heat to the dryer and net that heat off using a meter. So that's kind of what I imagine. So it is possible still to use the boiler, but just not claim the RHI for that specific use. Thanks, guys. Brilliant stuff. So the upcoming events I've promised you. So you really wanted to come along and see us at the Low Carbon Agricultural Show in Stoneleigh, Warwickshire in March, 6th to 7th of March to be exact. At that show, we'll be showcasing all of the different innovations that have been supported by the Biomass Feedstocks Innovation Programme. So a really great opportunity to talk to specialists and find out all of the things that are coming soon. Similarly, in the next few months, there will be a showcase event for the Biomass Connector project and the BFI programme. That also is in the Midlands on the 7th of 8th of November. At the same time, or in the same week, there will be opportunities for overseas visitors in particular to go on trade missions to actually go and see the innovations and the trials, etc. So that's a great opportunity if you're coming over to the UK, and we would welcome that great opportunity. Just a mention of all of our partners within the project, and a big thanks as always to the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero. This is the last one of season 2, but the great news is that all 8 webinars are now on our website. So if you are that way inclined, you could binge watch the box set of all 8. And also, obviously, keep Biomass connected with us through our various social media channels. So please be aware that we'll be starting the season 3 in November next year, and we'll be dealing with topics like carbon, and that's a very topical topic, and agroforestry, harvesting of different biomass crops, and then probably a look forward to what might happen next in the sector. So please check out the What's On pages in order to do that. And of course, we will have events all over the summer to where you can come and join us at the various hub sites. So please seek us out on the What's On guide there. So just one final thank you to Will, Johnathan and David. It's been a nice end to the season without a cliffhanger. So thank you very much. Goodbye, and we'll see you next time.